You've probably heard that phrase before, right? Bread and circuses. It's this powerful idea that's been echoing for 2,000 years, all the way from the Roman Empire right into our world today. And really, it's a warning about what can happen when a society starts being willing to trade its freedom for just a little bit of comfort. So let's get into it and see what this is all about.
The Roman philosopher Cicero, he absolutely nailed it with this quote. He points out that, look, the bread and the games themselves aren't the problem. The real evil, the real danger, is in the willingness of the people to sell their rights. And that idea, that's the key to everything we're going to talk about.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll break down what bread and circuses really means. Then, we'll look at how Rome actually built this system, see the pretty devastating consequences, and then draw a line from that straight to our modern world. And finally, we'll explore a completely different way of taking care of each other.
Okay, so what did this famous phrase, panem et circenses, what did it actually mean for the Romans? Well, it was a lot more than just a free lunch, let me tell you. It was a seriously powerful tool of control. At its heart, it was a political strategy. A simple one, really. Keep the public happy with the basics, food and entertainment, so they won't pay attention to the more important stuff. Things like their freedoms being slowly chipped away, or their duties as citizens. It's basically the ultimate distraction.
The guy who actually came up with the phrase, a Roman poet named Juvenal, he saw this as a huge moral failure. I mean, he was watching his own society just willingly trade their civic responsibilities for a full stomach and a good show at the Colosseum. And you gotta understand, this system didn't just happen by accident. Oh no. It was a very deliberate political design that slowly, piece by piece, created a population that was totally dependent on the state.
What's so interesting when you look at this timeline is you can see how it grew. It starts out as just a tactic to win some votes in 140 BC, but then it becomes this official grain dole. And before you know it, the emperors are using it to manage the entire population. It basically cemented the state as the ultimate provider, and the people, well, they became dependents.
The historian Plutarch saw this so clearly. He said, this wasn't some sudden collapse, it was a slow, creeping thing. A kind of quiet poison that just worked its way through the veins of the Republic, bit by bit.
So what happens? What happens to a society when its people start looking to the government instead of to each other? Well, the consequences were pretty devastating.
Let's go back to Juvenal again for a second. He's looking at a people who once held all the power. I mean, they appointed generals, they appointed officials, they were the state, and he saw them reduce themselves to just passively waiting for their next handout and the next chariot race.
And this had this massive ripple effect through society. When the state takes on the job of being the provider, the bonds that hold people together, family, community, they start to break down. You're basically outsourcing the most important human connections. And when those connections weaken, the very soul of a society just withers. And that creates a population of isolated individuals, which, by the way, is way easier for a tyrant to control.
The historian Polybius saw the terrifying endgame to all of this. He saw that a people who get used to taking from others eventually turn to violence to get what they want. And all that chaos makes them cry out for a strong ruler, a monarch, to come in and restore order, which completes the cycle, right back to tyranny.
All right, so let's shift gears. We're going to jump from the ancient world and see how this Roman blueprint is kind of echoed in more recent history. And honestly, the pattern is startlingly familiar.
So the names and the details, they're different, of course. But the basic structure, it's strikingly similar. Just like Rome had its grain dole and its child support programs, modern America has programs that came out of the New Deal and the War on Poverty. These are state-run systems funded by force through taxes, and they create a really clear parallel between the dependency models of then and now.
And this is just a huge change from what early observers, like Alexis de Tocqueville, saw as America's greatest strength. He was just blown away by how Americans would voluntarily come together to build their own communities, founding schools, hospitals, charities, all without any government forcing them to do it.
So the central argument here is that the New Deal wasn't really new at all. It was the same old deal that we saw in Rome. It was this fundamental shift away from that voluntary community support that Tocqueville admired and a move toward a centralized system that critics say just creates an appetite for benefits and ultimately weakens the people by making them dependent.
But is force the only way to care for people who are in need? History actually shows us another path, one that's built on a completely different foundation.
This alternative model is called pure religion.
Now, this isn't about big buildings or specific rituals. It's about a personal duty to care for one another through voluntary acts of love and charity, instead of through contributions that are forced by the state.
This quote from the year 150 AD is incredible. Why? Because it describes a highly organized, very effective social welfare system that was run by the early Christian church. It was comprehensive, it says it takes care of all who are in need, and it was funded completely by voluntary donations, a total contrast to the Roman state system.
So the whole point, the secret sauce, is how it worked. This was a system built entirely on free will and personal responsibility. It was a network of people actively choosing to care for each other, driven by love and a sense of duty, not by the sword of the state.
And this brings us right back to the central choice, a choice that echoes all the way from ancient Rome to us today. Are we active participants in building our communities through voluntary service, or have we, like the Romans did, given up our duties for the comfort and distraction of modern breads and circuses?
In the end, it really comes down to a choice between two very different models for society, one that's based on state force and dependency, or a living network that's built on love and liberty. If this explainer got you thinking, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share it with others. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and if you want to go deeper on this, there's a link to the full source material for you in the description. And if you feel inspired to move from just thinking about this to actually doing something, we invite you to explore a community of people who are actively trying to build this network of love. That link is also waiting for you down in the description. Thanks so much for watching.